Welcome to Screen Quest, the podcast where a fellowship of film lovers and armchair movie experts plays film roulette. I'm one of your hosts, Chris Waterman, joined by Will Rotondi
Hey, how's it going?
and May Finch.
Hello, hello.
On today's episode, we're talking about the role of a lifetime, specifically Margot Robbie in I, Tonya. Very excited to get into this, as this was my first time seeing it. We'll also be playing a little game around that specific topic. More to come on that. And of course, drawing a side card. But first, our least favorite segment for an opener, but one that is important. We are memorializing both Paul Reubens and William Friedkin, who passed away since we last recorded the episode. Two very different men with very different careers, but both geniuses in their own way. Reubens, of course, you probably know most famously as Pee Wee Herman, although he had a lot of really interesting character work throughout his career. And William Friedkin, we've talked about at least once on this podcast, specifically our Halloween offshoot Scream Quest as a director of The Exorcist, The French Connection, Sorcerer, and many, many other films. So RIP to both of those gentlemen. I just rewatched Pee-wee's Big Adventure for the first time since I was probably like 10 or 11. Marianne had never seen it, so I was like, it's going right on because it is wonderfully Burton and just an amazing Pee-wee Herman film. Have you both seen that?
I think so, but it's been ages.
I
Couldn't
have
tell you
not.
anything.
My childhood viewing was limited, so I think I need to go and finally watch it.
God, it's so zany and like I just man, like he's so singular in it, as you would imagine with that character. But you mash up the character of Pee Wee Herman with Tim Burton's like just twisted, wild imagination, and you have an amazing creation. I mean, really top to bottom, there's so many memorable parts to it. Some of it's a little dated, like the celebrity cameos and stuff. Like, I don't know how many people these days would know like who Twisted Sister or Dee Snider is, like, you know, just by sight, but whatever. But it is a really fun movie, and I think like a little more adult than I remembered or probably picked up on as a kid, which is always fun to come back to.
Yeah, it's nice getting that second layer of jokes that were made for your parents.
Yeah, it got away with a lot more in the 80s. Let me tell you, like I feel like than some movies do. That there was no PG-13, I guess, until 84, so maybe that's why as well. Like you could kind of push the envelope. The MPA couldn't say it was R, but I'm sure they didn't love some of the stuff that made it into to the films. But yeah, I highly recommend that one. And I oddly enough, I don't think I watched much Pee-wee's Playhouse. Was that something that was in your household at all, May, or like same thing? Like nope. Yeah. Yeah,
How would you describe the style of humor? Because I'm trying to think like why my parents would have objected.
um well, it's hard to kind of categorize it. So Pee-wee is like overly joyous, but also incredibly weird and like zany. Like
It was probably too happy. That must have been it.
I just know that I had a friend whose parents like resented the show, not because they objected to any of the content, but there was like a secret word of the day that like every time somebody said it, like you were supposed to scream, and they had like a household of 3 children. So like they'd be at dinner and all of a sudden all the kids would scream like loudly and like scare the shit out of the parents. So that's an idea, I guess, of what the humor was like or what the content of the show would have been like.
Man, I missed out.
I loved how like queer coded the Tim Burton movie is, and I was like, am I imagining this? And like, no, man, I went down the rabbit hole of both Paul Reubens' like personal life, and then also like how Pee Wee Herman was sort of claimed as like a queer icon. You know, certainly like after the movie like came out for a while, like it's one of those things that's just like gotten more and more attention as time has gone on, which is really, really cool. But yeah. And then of course William Friedkin, I'll admit I've only seen 2 of his films, I think, which is The Exorcist and French Connection. But I know our film group is going to watch a little like a couple of buddies that I've been watching some movies with. Sorcerer is the movie that's been nominated next because none of us have seen it, and it sounds like an awesome premise. about a group of men who meet in Central American country and are transporting a truck full of dynamite that is like sweating and super unstable. And the cover
Ooh.
art just looks amazing. There's a bridge that's all broken down and a truck driving across it. So I was like, ah, sold.
Nice.
But yeah, another person with a like interesting sort of past. We talked a little bit about some of his behavior on The Exorcist, and I thought it was quite interesting that Guillermo del Toro kind of came out around like the announcement of his death and was like, yeah, he was known for having this like temper and being very sort of strict and intimidating to actors. And he's like, let me share a story. And he went on to share a story about watching him work like later in life and how gentle he was with an actor who just could not for the life of them get the performance right for this big monologue they were supposed to deliver. And he just said, hey, like, it's okay, let's we'll move on to the next thing, we'll come back and do this, like it's or like had a private chat. And he was like, some people grow and learn as they get older, and like a lot of people talk about how like angry and crazy he could be, but like he was also this person at points in his life. I thought it was kind of a sweet anecdote, you know. Sometimes I think we romanticize like angry genius, you know, with the artist, and so it was nice to see that he wasn't slapping priest in his older age.
He didn't have one just like on hand for every film, just in case he
like,
had to.
like a whooping boy, it's like a slapping priest. The actor flubs their line and just backhands the priest. Oh, that's an image that you have to all deal with now.
Sorry, not sorry.
Oh, have you either of you seen anything outside of the big ones? Bugs one I've always been interested in because I heard the play is mental. It's like about like madness and sort of apparently really gross. And then Killer Joe with Matthew McConaughey like got an NC-17 rating for violence. So like I've never been brave enough to like work up to that, but so many people have told me it's great. So a couple more on the list. But... well, R.I.P. fellas, you will be missed. Love your work for what we saw. And that brings us to a side quest. So let's see if we can cleanse our palate and inject a little bit of happiness by discussing something random. Neuralizer. So this is where we're going to go back and erase a film from our brain and watch it for the first time. You could pick one.
So I have one to throw out just as, I don't know, just because I feel like in some ways let me restart. I'll back up for a second. I have one to throw out that's probably kind of a weird choice because I think that it's interesting to see the direction of where subsequent films by this director have gone. So if I had not seen this film first, I wonder how my expectations of what I would be going into would be different. So I'm going to throw out The Sixth Sense as a film that I would be interested to, like, if I could just wipe the slate clean and then go back in cold, if I would be expecting a twist, or would I have a certain expectation of the quality of what the film is going to be like? Because I know that a lot of people, it's kind of hit or miss these days with Shyamalan as to whether you really like his, well, I shouldn't say really like you either like it or you don't necessarily. I know that for myself, there were a few there that I did enjoy when he first started out, and then it kind of got progressively, I enjoyed them less, and so I kind of steered clear. And then, of course, there's always, jokes about it too. But I always really liked The Sixth Sense, and I enjoyed the twist of it. But I also saw it when I was probably, geez, when did that film come out? I'm gonna have to Google that real quick. I feel like that was high school
like
for me, maybe
98-ish, 99 maybe.
Yeah, 99. So that was oh geez, that was either middle or high school at that point. It's probably middle school when that came out. So my mindset then, and just being like shocked about the twist at the very end, and then you want to go back and watch it for all the little clues to see if everything lines up. And I like when a film can do that really well, where it makes you want to go back and rewatch everything just to see, did this really line up? Was there any sort of like plot hole to what was there, or does it still stand up on itself based on everything that had happened? And am I not just like being emotionally like shocked at the end and believing that everything, would make sense? And so I would like to, I don't know how I would do with that, because I think that I would be very much, I would have an opinion about it before I even went into the film. And I don't know if it would have the same impact as it might have had, since it was the first one that kind of like made him a big deal, for, I guess, the the twist ending, and the just to make popularize that sort of expectation back in the day. So how about for you guys? Like, how do you think you would react if you had to go back and rewatch that film, knowing nothing about it?
Well, first of all, that's a fantastic pick. Um, the thing is, I haven't seen it since I was pretty young. Like, funny enough, I couldn't watch Pee-wee, but I could watch The Sixth Sense when I was a kid.
Nice.
So I have actually forgotten the twist, and
Oh,
with that
we're
context,
not going to talk about it then. We're just
no,
going to
yeah.
Or is that then you tell us when you rewatch it at some point how you feel.
and with that context, it's like, yeah, now I really want to watch it because you brought it up, and I'm like, oh yeah, I want to experience that again. And like, I'm sure I'll probably remember it as soon as the movie starts. But yeah, I mean, I think in general with any movie where the suspense is a critical component of what made the movie a success, like it obviously would benefit from a neuralizing session. But I don't know, for me, I love the costuming and character design in that movie so much that it's probably one I would still rewatch even if I did remember the ending.
Nice.
Yeah. First of all, I think this is this may touch on like a really cool approach to this prompt. Like it's really well done on coming at that from like creatively. Like I love kind of their why behind the pick, not just like, oh, I love the movie so much, I wish I could forget it and experience it again. Also very appropriate to what his whole thing is, which is like twist. Sounds like that would be a twist. Yeah.
The twist is I have forgotten everything about him and now I must learn it again.
So like I'm somebody who I try to be pretty objective about his stuff. There's certainly movies of his I didn't bother watching because the reaction was so bad, and I've already been lukewarm on a lot of his work. But I think he's crafted some really good yarns as well. I think The Sixth Sense, I won't talk about like the ending, but like it's just a well-crafted ghost story, like anyway. You know what I mean? Like on a surface level, that movie works, even knowing like what the twist is, because it's properly scary. Like there are things that stick with you in that movie because of the craftsmanship. I feel similarly about Unbreakable. I think that's one of his that's also a very strong film. The twist was almost like it didn't matter to me because I liked so much of like how that film unfolds, and the subject matter and like the performance from Bruce Willis is like a, it's solid. I even liked Split, and kind of my point is like I think M. Night's like the expectation around his films is like his greatest enemy. And I think that he felt this increased pressure to always deliver the goods, and everything had to be a twist and like the creativity. And I wish he would recognize that like when he's creatively free, he's a really decent filmmaker. And I think unfortunately he's a slave to like the expectations around what it is he does. And I'd love to him to just make a film that was just a thriller or like a proper ghost story, horror film, whatever, like sci-fi, without the expectations that there had to be a twist ending. I wonder how that would look and if it would be better, because I don't think his movies often work because of what the twist is, and like everything serves that, and it doesn't always like work well for me. So I wouldn't mind being neuralized for the Sixth Sense, but I think that's a movie that I enjoy anyway, just because it's a beautifully crafted like horror ghost story.
Just out of curiosity, what's a Shyamalan movie that you watched that you just got really disappointed in?
The Village, I didn't care for at all. That was another example of something where it just I felt like the entire thing just served to get you to the twists, which was neither inspired or like very interesting to me. I know there's people that like it a lot. That's fine. I thought Signs was decent. Like that's like one that I would kind of middle of the road. But again, when the gets to the point of the movie that it's like all about revealing like the monster, I go back to Jaws where I'm like, less is more. Like it's fine. Like I didn't need to see what these things look like. As soon as I saw what they look like, I thought that it was bad creature design, and I was no longer scared.
Mm.
You know,
Mhm.
the solution to the alien invasion is interesting. It's kind of a little nod to H.G. Wells, like, you know, in a
Yeah.
different way. It's not germs, but it's similarly simple and sort of cool. I'm trying to think what else. I didn't bother with Lady in the Water or
Mhm.
any of the recent ones, Old or Knock at the Cabin.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, or The Happening even.
I was disappointed by Knock at the Cabin, even though I didn't see it, because apparently it got pulled from theaters early.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
And I didn't have the heart to see it after that, because the reviews had come out and I was like, oh, this is very different from the story it's based on, which is a great short story or novella, I guess, by Paul Tremblay, called The Cabin at the End of the World, and I highly recommend that. But I think it's especially hard as a reader who likes a lot of the books that he bases his movies off of and then changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I imagine that's how people felt with Avatar, the airbending, not the blue people.
Mm. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I forgot he did that too.
Because
Jeez.
I'd rather
Famously
forget
bad.
that he did that. Yeah. I'll neuralize that just for my own peace of mind and just stick with the cartoon. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
shame. Like he
So
seems like a wonderfully talented guy. I don't know. Oh, a great example is like Split. Like the sort of the twist of that where like it's not even the main twist of the movie where it's like, oh, this isn't in the Unbreakable universe. It's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like, I don't need this to connect. Like, this was fine without like now trying to start your own MCU. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I just like I got to that bit, and a lot of people were like, "Oh shit!" Now there's gonna be like, you know, like a third movie that has all the care. And I was like, I don't give a shit. Now it's way less interesting because you've tied this concrete block around the ankle of this movie, and like it should just live and breathe on its own. And now you've made it connect. And I never saw Glass, to be fair, so I don't know how that turned out. I probably should at some point just to kind of finish that trilogy of movies out. But yeah, I did see a big spoiler. So maybe that's why I was like, okay.
gotta be in the mood for it.
What's that? Mood for it? Yeah.
Gotta be in the mood.
It's just I'm gonna sound like a snob here. I can't imagine there's so many great things to watch. Like I already have so many things vying for my attention. It's hard for me to like take the time to watch something unless I'm really like convinced that I'm either gonna love it or it's interesting enough that if I don't, like, it wasn't an exercise in like mediocrity or futility. And I know that sounds snobby. I don't mean to sound snobby, but it's true. Like, I mean, it's
Yeah.
just that's how it is. That's why like I used to have this thing like where I gotta finish the show, right? Like if I start a show and
Yeah.
I'm into it and the show gets bad seasons, I gotta finish it. And like I've learned like the sunk cost fallacy is a very real thing. Like if you're not enjoying a game show, whatever, just it's okay. Like throw up your shoulders and say you tried and move on to something that it stimulates you more, I guess. Well, hey, great pick, man. Thanks. That was a cool way to
Truly.
approach that
Yeah. Thank you.
prompt. I love it. And now I'm, gonna as I'm wont to do, I'm gonna narrate the transition to the main screen so I don't forget to do it. But we're here today to talk about I, Tonya, which was May's nomination for Role of a Lifetime for Margot Robbie. So I'm gonna let May into the driver's seat to take it away.
Hello. So, I, Tonya, is I guess you could call it biopic of Tonya Harding. And it does follow her life from childhood to basically the end of her career. And it focuses pretty heavily on the incidents in which Nancy Kerrigan, I said Carrington for some reason. Nancy Kerrigan's knee got bashed in allegedly a hit arranged by Tonya's ex-husband, Jeff, and possibly Tonya herself. The basic plot summary is that leading up to that event, Tonya had a difficult skating career, in part because of her abusive mother and allegedly abusive husband. but also just because she came from a much lower socioeconomic status than a lot of the other skaters and had trouble meeting the presentation requirements. Towards the end of the film, you find out that she gets banned from skating due to her involvement with the Nancy Kerrigan incident and pursues a variety of other careers afterwards. I'm curious what your first impressions were, and remind me if you've seen this before too.
Yeah, this first time seeing it, it was on the list to watch when it came out, and it's just I forget what happened, but I think I was out of town or something. Marianne was dying to see it, and she's a traitor, and she betrayed me and watched the film. And then I was like, I don't want to watch it by myself. And then we drew the card. So it's exactly what I did. No, but in all seriousness, I it's something I've been wanting to watch for some time. So I was glad to have a reason to see it. First impressions. So things I liked about the film. I love the sort of Scorsese-esque, like breaking the fourth wall, like Goodfellas, like with like music of the time as it kind of progresses through. Like it was very Goodfellas-esque for me with the narration, because Goodfellas does the same thing where like it goes to different characters talking about their perspective on things. I liked all like the unreliable narrators. You see a scene play out and somebody's saying it's bullshit, and then somebody's retorting. That was all really, really great stylistic choices, I think, to tell the story. I think the tone of the movie was really perfect given the subject matter. Pretty heavy subject matter. It lightens it a little bit. It doesn't trivialize it by any stretch, but I think it makes it a little bit easier to swallow some of those like tough pills. I thought the performances were wonderful. I know we're here to talk about Robbie specifically as Tonya, so I'll hold on that, but spoiler alert, it was fantastic. Allison Janney, I hope I'm saying that right, as Lavana. Oh my goodness, dude.
Right?
Like I mean, that is like something straight out of like a Hitchcock movie for like a domineering, like crazy mom. I thought that was fantastic. Sebastian Stan was great. Really just all around like pretty good, solid cast. Things that I was not so sure, and maybe I just like need to work through with you guys. I did feel like at times I couldn't tell if the film was like taking a stance on something or like making an assertion on what they thought was the truth. Sometimes it felt like that, and sometimes it felt like it was meant to be sort of up in the air, up into interpretation. So I found it a little uneven at times where I'm like, I feel like you're really taking a stance here, but in the next scene you're going, who knows? So maybe that's where they felt like certain things were historically documented better than others. I don't know. We'll get into that. Yeah, overall, I thought it was a solid movie. I think the performances in the moment to moment was probably a little bit better than the entire product. Not that I didn't enjoy it or think it was a bad film. I thought it was overall very solid. But I did find it just a tad uneven at times. But didn't take away from the enjoyment. I thought the soundtrack was great, especially ending with The Passenger. Yeah, that's my impression.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the kind of like angle and unreliable narrator aspect, because I have a specific question on that. But just so you're both aware, the movie, I mean, some of the facts are just like, established facts from various legal documents and stuff, but
yes,
a lot of the more kind of colorful stuff is from an interview with Tonya and an interview with Jeff. So really filling in the blanks on a lot of things. For instance, they couldn't get a hold of Lavona, and so there is one recorded interview with her that they're basing everything off of, that and what Tonya said about her.
In those recordings, did we ever find out what Sean's favorite episode of Star Trek was that got taped over by his dad? Because I kind of want to know what that was.
Asking the real questions.
Was it Next Gen or
really
was it original series too? We don't even know which Star Trek. Like,
it's true. And can we even really believe that Sean likes Star Trek? Because Sean's just bullshitting everything. Let's face it. So, but yeah, no. I think I mentioned his character just because I recently saw that same actor. I think it's Paul Walter Hauser.
Yes.
Who was in Blackbird, TV series with Taron Egerton on Apple TV. That was really good. But he also kind of just has that same sort of persona, just a little bit creepier. And So I was getting flashbacks to the other character that I'd seen before watching this film because I hadn't seen I, Tonya before. So to answer your first question, May, about that. Um, but overall, I really liked it. I liked it more than I thought I might, actually, just due to the subject matter and kind of what Chris was saying too, where the humor, the dark comedy aspect of it does lighten the mood, so that even though we're watching something that is very much a train wreck, especially like all the abuse
Yeah.
and just some of the stuff, like man, when Levana throws that knife at her, and it's just like this is getting darker than I ever thought it was going to be because I vaguely remember when this happened when I was a kid and this was big news, but that the most of it was just that what had happened to Nancy Kerrigan and then Tonya Harding having that stigma about being involved, and that's pretty much the gist of what I knew. I didn't know any of the other details. Plus, I was also like a child, so I probably wouldn't have stuck with me anyway. But yeah, it was interesting to go back and to see this dramatization of it and to be more interested now about these people than I ever was before. And um, but more to the point, like the soundtrack, completely agree. Great soundtrack. Um, you know what, I didn't honestly pick up on the Goodfellas sort of stylistic there, Chris, but I agree with you as well on that. I'm going to copy you on a lot of things because I can't really fault you for your review. You covered all the main points. But yeah, I like when there's the fourth wall breaking where characters are interacting with that and kind of going over the events, either agreeing or disagreeing, arguing with each other. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect the interview to sort of be like the style of where they were going to go with depicting it. And truthfully, I just thought it was going to be even darker than it was. And so yeah, overall, I think the way they handled it, the subject matter, and of course the performances, like I really can't add anything more than that. Just in agreement. It was a great film. And I'm glad that you chose it and that we got the opportunity to check another one off the box there.
Thank you. I'm glad I could pitch it to the podcast, honestly, because this is the third time I've seen it. I saw it when it came out originally, and I watched it another time since then. And I loved this film immediately. It was my first time hearing about the Nancy Kerrigan incident and even who Tonya Harding was. Will, you talked about hearing about it when it was in the news. Did you hear about it, Chris, like before watching this movie much?
Yeah, so like one of those early childhood memories or like where you start becoming aware of the news as a child, there's three things. One was the OJ trial, which they reference like at the end of the film.
Yeah.
And then the other was the Clinton impeachment.
Yeah.
Like, those were kind of like three stories that really stick out to me. Where like even as a young person, like you were aware, even if you didn't have all the context or really understand what was going on, it was just that prominent on newsstands and on TV. And yeah, definitely remember. My mom was really into figure skating as well, so that probably helped. Like we watched, I can't tell you how many like programs on TV, so I knew like all the figure skaters at the time just because like we had one TV and it's like, yeah, that's what you're watching. You're whatever someone's watching. That's like has if an adult has a preference, like that's what everyone's watching. So
yeah, it's interesting. This watch, I was paying more attention to the fact that there is this interesting tonal shift from like rather, tragicomic biopic about halfway through to just ridiculous true crime documentary where they're going into like how this crime was planned and how poorly it was planned. And one of the quotes was like, in a story of boobs, somehow the two biggest boobs pulled off this crime. And then it just takes you right back to where Tonya is and how this is affecting her career. And there's definitely a pro Tonya slant. So my first question is like, Tonya Harding as a character, not necessarily who she actually is in real life, how did you feel about her through this film?
man, I waffled back and forth between feeling an immense amount of like empathy and like pity at times for her and being incredibly frustrated by some of the decisions that she made and just wanting her to like leave so many situations. Her mom, Jet, like she's almost free and clear like a couple of times, like from a lot of bad situations. Sort of the pressure obviously that she's dealing with. But yeah, but then there was like times where I don't know, it's just like, oh, pull your head out of your ass, like come on, like um I also don't, I'm not really sure, it's hard not to talk about the real person a little bit, like how I ultimately feel about her involvement and like how much like she knew and stuff. And I tried not to read too much about the real life stuff before recording this because I didn't want that to taint like the discussion of the movie. But I found her complex. I think that's one thing the film does really well is they portray her as a complex human being with a lot of faults and strengths and admirable qualities sort of all mixed in. And it's a fairly robust picture, I think, of a human being, which is something I was a little bit worried about when I saw the trailers. Honestly, I wasn't sure if they were going to kind of paint her as like a caricature. And I
Yeah.
think to some extent, like she is, but like not in a way that is, what's the word I'm looking for? Like cruel or sort of like mean spirited. I think like it's caricature because the whole movie is a caricature basically of all these people and the events.
Yeah, well said. I definitely relate to her in the sense of like I'm glad that she's a woman that is portrayed as like being exceptionally talented and that being kind of separate from all of the poor personal and professional choices that she makes. And like that her like kind of tragic backstory is portrayed, but that's also separate from her whole story. And yeah, I just liked how the pieces were kind of divided but also put together of who she was and what her life experience was like.
We'll say that despite all the bad choices she made, she never quit.
Not a quitter.
She got her ass beat, and she was like, "No, I'm not." Even when the one thing that she wanted the most got taken away from her, she still found something to do after that. So I got to admire. I mean, the character. I have to admire the character for that. So, I will say, I don't. I mean, and again, just based on the film itself in that context, I and I also have to temper this with not understanding or having ever experienced in a physically abusive relationship myself. I have no idea about what dynamic that's got to feel like in order to feel like you have to go back to that person for any reason, regardless of what the reason is, even if it's to try and establish your own goals within to create a picture that other people believe. Because in some ways this made me feel a lot like Gone Girl, where it's the popular opinion perception of what you look like to everybody else that helps you get ahead or gets you sympathy. So it's like, was that really worth? I mean, if that was worth it to you and you were willing to put up with that abuse to get to that point, then you're either very ingenuitive in a strange sort of masochistic way, or or there's, I don't know, or you just felt like that was the only route to take. And so for better or worse, yeah, I got to admire her commitment to trying to get what she wanted.
Yeah, seeing her continually go back to Jeff or go back to her mom was heartbreaking. But there was one line that hit me like a bag of bricks, where she's first talking about the abuse of Jeff, and she's like, "Well, my mom loved me, and my mom hit me, so what was the problem with it, basically?" And I think that kind of communicates well, like how hard, if you've grown up with abuse, it is to like properly recognize and avoid it in your romantic relationships. So I can't judge her too much for going back to him, even if it does seem like it was maybe for her own manipulative reasons, at least by the end. But yeah, messy situation for sure. And I really appreciated the commitment to showing different viewpoints. Speaking of which, how do you guys feel about Jeff?
Fuck that guy.
Mustache.
I mean, Jesus. Where to begin? Again, played well by Sebastian Stan. But anybody with the name Galooly like is bound to be like a dumbass. I don't know. I'm just kidding. If your name's Galooly, I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know. Like I think even though the film tries to give him a bit of a fair shake in terms of him saying his piece, don't never really like warmed to him. He was funny as like fodder, I guess, like comedic fodder. Then he'd haul off and punch her, and you're like, oh, okay. Um, seems like a not good guy. I don't really know what else to say besides that. I mean,
I
you
mean, I think we
know,
all agree that Jeff sucks, but
I mean,
He
I
should
don't
have
know.
stayed in the
Like
Air Force,
he, you know,
or he should have
amidst the
gone into the
ruining
Air Force then. Sorry, go
amidst
ahead.
the
I
ruining
didn't
her
mean to cut you.
career, you know, which I suppose like is a little comfort, but if he really did that, I don't know. Like I suppose that's like a nice um apology, but yeah, I don't know. Like he just seemed like a buffoon that did nothing for. I mean, I can't think of a single thing, at least in the film, that Jeff does that enriches her life like whatsoever, and is not some sort of like burden or distraction. Or I suppose he supports her, you know, does show up to like the events and like cheers her on, and maybe he had good intentions with the whole Kerrigan thing. Although I suppose that's a different discussion altogether. I don't like him.
me neither.
That makes three. Yeah. I yeah, it's one of those things where it's like it started out looked like okay, you know, decent, maybe decent guy, yeah, but very quickly established the fact that he is an asshole and abusive and self-centered. And yeah, agreed. But I can't fault it for choosing Sebastian Stan to be that character because he does that personality type very well. I feel like there was another film I saw him in who was very similar to that too. And um, yeah, no, over. I mean, I believed it. Seeing that character, I believed just how obnoxiously vile he was. So, yeah.
I think he's a great example of like the kind of guy that can initially seem like your ticket out of a shitty situation or a shitty start in life, and then quickly turns into not that, but you're like, but maybe.
He bought me Dove bars. He got the name brand. Like,
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
sign.
Cha-ching. He makes decent peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. You know, maybe it's not so bad.
Yeah, fuck Jeff. Uh,
Yeah.
Obviously we have to talk about Lavona. Allison Janney absolutely deserves the shout out you gave her for that performance. That was
For
terrifying.
real.
Yeah, same moment you guys pointed out about the knife going into Tanya's arm. I remember seeing that in theaters and just like I had been eating something and I just stopped chewing and I was like, oh, that is a sudden escalation right there. Yeah, definitely was not the direction I thought the movie was going at that point. And unfortunately, I don't feel like we have much info or much of Lavona's story from Lavona's perspective. It's mostly based on just stories from Tanya. Although I was reading, the one thing that is confirmed is that she would beat Tanya with a hairbrush because someone literally did walk in, like you see in the movie, and like catch that happening. So unclear exactly how much of what's portrayed in the movie was going on, but at least some of it's been corroborated by other sources. But yeah, movie Lavona, what'd you think of her?
singularly deplorable, just top to bottom. No redeeming qualities in my mind. I think incapable of love, classic narcissist. Like there's just so many things there that just I was captivated every time she was on the screen, but seemed pretty clear that she wanted all of the credit for Tanya being successful. But aside from maybe like dropping her at the ice rink, like I don't know how much credit she's really owed to any of Tanya's success. Like she thinks that like, oh, if I neg her, like she's gonna like do better. And I don't know if it's a true thing. It seems probably like a movie embellishment where there's the guy that's like yelling all the stuff and she passes on the money. Like it's getting the point across though, if that's like what she needs. And seems like bullshit. It just seems like the way, at least from the film portrayal, Tanya's built this wall around herself because she's been sort of hardened by abuse.
Yeah.
and that's why she can still skate despite all of that. But you kind of, your mind wonders how different her life would have been even as a professional skater if she had had sort of more like love and support at home, just how different things like would have turned out. But I think if you were going to put a villain in this movie, Levana is definitely it.
No kidding. I still laugh at the insanely darkly funny moment when Tonya and her dad are out hunting, and Tanya's like, "Yes, mom did this and this again and this again. Do you love her?" They're both just kind of like, meh.
Yeah.
Because like to have that realization as such a young child, like again, probably artistic license, but oof.
I think it was, well, I agree with the points both of you have already made. The scene that I thought was the most surprising to me was sort of, and it was one of those things where you kind of get like a little spidey sense about something's not right kind of a deal. It's like at the very end where, or pretty much like almost to the very end of the film, where she comes in to visit Tonya and says something to the effect of like, "I'm proud of you," and like it's almost like this weird Twilight Zone moment where you're like, hold on. You've never said a single nice thing this entire film. Why do I think that this is even coming remotely from anywhere truthful? And then what's your goal with that? But then it's like, well, baby, there's just like that moment where even I'm convinced that maybe there's some shred of niceness in this abusive, like just for a split second. Then you're just like, why'd she put her hand in her pocket? Is she recording this? And I'm like, yep, should have seen some shystiness coming with that. So yeah, that was, but I think to me, that was the one scene out of all of it that I was like, man, that's good and awful at the same time. That just because there's like just you want to kind, and maybe that's sort of to feel like Tonya a bit, where you just kind of want to believe for just a moment. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, she is an excellent villain for the film, and that's all I got.
She definitely gives me the most sympathy for Tonya, because it's like, wow, you're getting nothing positive from any of the close people in your life. Like, I can't say I'd be doing much better in that kind of a spot.
I think it's kind of amazing how well she does, given like the home life. If even a fraction of that stuff was true, I think to be able to hold together enough to be, I mean, obviously, I mean, I don't know where you guys follow, but I think there's like some athletic ability that she's probably born with, but big mistake. Like it takes an incredible amount of training and commitment to be competitive in a sport like that, and I think it's wild that she was able to manage as well as she did,
and to be able to do a triple axel that almost no one else could do at the time.
Still, like I read, like I think there's like it's less than 10 people like have ever been able to like do that in a competition, at least for like women figure skaters. I didn't dig deep into it, but it's still pretty impressive even all this time later.
I think it's also this is just a random thought that came to me, sorry, but I think also like a key part of her kind of personality and Tanya's own, I guess, kind of character fault of maybe being a little bit too, head up her ass, as you're saying, Chris, is the need to feel like she has value, at least in this one thing, because she's getting devalued everywhere else in her life. So I think that is what drives a lot of her perfectionism with skating, and is like, maybe everything else you're saying about me is true, but I can, skate better than anyone else. And that's kind of what she clings on to for value as a person. So I was I was relieved by the afterword of the movie when they were like, oh, she's happily married with kids and her own career now. And I'm like, okay, good for you, Tonya. You found other sources of meaning in your life.
Speaking of which, one thing that I was wondering if they were going to cover and they didn't, was that her and Jeff sold their honeymoon sex tape like to Penthouse for like $500,000.
I did not know that.
Yep. So if you want to judge Jeff even more harshly, no, I'm just kidding. But yeah, that's a real thing that happened, and it was the same year I think that all that, like 94, it was like a big thing, like big story, because obviously she was embroiled around the other controversies and maybe saw the writing on the wall. Obviously she had some money that she needed to pay, as we saw in the film. But yeah, it was like $500,000. They split it evenly, and it was like a big thing. One of the first, I mean, like this is like pre Paris Hilton or like any of that shit. Like smartphones didn't exist, so it was like a big deal. Anyway, I suppose that would have probably been a bit too big of a bummer, probably for the end of the movie, to be like, and then she did the boxing is a little more inspiration. I will put it that way. More inspirational, I should say.
A little less sad.
Yeah.
Aw. Well, good to know that. But before we talk more about Margot specifically, or about like cinematography, I did want to touch on one more character, and that is Sean. Because we have to talk about Sean.
Yeah.
Just
creepy ass motherfucker. Living with his parents. I think to me, and this is sort of tangential to answer your question, but I always find it interesting when they show footage of the real people that they're supposed to be based off of at the end of some movies, and at this one where you see Sean during the credits, and I thought, he's not as creepy as that guy portrayed him, like just sort of the general demeanor, but I like how some of the essence was still there about just the bullshit that this guy likes to say to try and get people to believe that he's like a counter-terrorist, like expert. He's gone undercover
that he
and all
actually
these
said that.
yeah, like verbatim. Like that is hilarious. And he seemed to be very confident when he said it, like the real guy said it, in that, at least in that clip. Whereas Sean in the film version is he is not nearly as confident. It's sort of there, but it's sort of it's more just like goofy, comedic, creepy, slightly uncertain, tries to like pivot every 2 seconds to try and make up for whatever garbage just came out of his mouth that he tried to make somebody believe. So I don't know, I feel bad for Sean in the sense that it feels like that's the best he ever had in life, and I don't know why it ever came to that. Like his parents, for the most part, seemed generally pretty normal. They were a little too enthusiastic, I think, because he admitted that he was like behind the thing with Nancy Kerrigan, right? At one point, where his dad's like, they're all watching the TV about the news, and he's
several
like,
points.
He told everyone he met.
That's right. Yeah. How did the FBI find out? I didn't talk to anybody, So yeah, I don't know. I'm more curious about why Sean is the creeper that he is, but at the same point, I just thought I don't know. Like I found it entertaining in the sense, like for the dark comedy of like just the dark comedy of errors of all the dumb stuff that was going to unfold. Like you knew it was going to be bad. You knew it was going to be a clusterfuck, but I don't know. It was just like, this is just too goofy. I believe it, at least for the characters, I would believe that would be something that would happen. So whether
it's like
or not
something out of a Coen brother film, bro. Like honestly, like
exactly.
like it's Fargo-esque or Lebowski-esque. Like he reminded me of Walter from The Big Lebowski, where he's like like my point, dude, is like why block it's under letters when you can break her knee? Like, you can almost like substitute John Goodman for that.
That's awesome.
I was primed for laughter because he plays Manta Ray, I think is his name, in Cobra Kai. Like he literally has a haircut that looks like a stingray or a manta ray. I forget what his character's name is, but he's very much that like proto incel, like kind of like character in that as well. So like as soon as I saw him on the screen, I was like, I know this guy's gonna make me laugh. I don't know why. And then I had to like Google like who he was, and I was like, that's where I know you from.
Yeah,
he's a little pitiful.
Yeah.
He's just a comical mix of arrogant and incompetent. Which I think describes a lot of the people of this film, but
it was hard watching him confronted like with like having to like reconcile like his own delusions of grandeur with the reality where they're like, no, you're not. Yeah, who said that? And he's just getting quieter and quieter. I don't know. It like the movie seems to imply that maybe he's got some psychological issues, maybe. But funny. I mean, for the sake of like the comedy, I thought that character worked really well, and being like, this is who a dumbass goes to, like, for solutions, basically. And who does he
Yeah,
hire?
for me, he was the only like true comedic relief because like the other characters would say or do funny stuff, but like usually in between like terrible violence, and
Mm,
with him it was just like reliably going to be something outrageous.
yeah,
Because I feel like Sean was the guy who like tries to pretend like he has been manipulating Jeff as well, or that he was the one that put in like the first death threat to
Yeah.
Tonya, that then inspires Jeff to want to do the same thing to Nancy, which then prompts Jeff to pay Sean money to give to two of Sean's buddies to go out and deliver letters, quote unquote, which then like evolves into we're just gonna go assault Nancy Kerrigan. So I thought it was interesting that like that sort of, I don't know, just not really knowing leading up to that, like which side the movie was going to try and go through. Because I guess what I'm not actually familiar enough with what the FBI found out or made public about it that I could say either way about it. So I'm assuming just based on what they knew, generally speaking, that was sort of how things ended up. Or I mean, besides clearly the guy getting busted for like using his credit card.
Yeah. All I know on that is just Sean it's unknown if Sean like called in the initial death threat. Like Tonya did get a death threat before all this happened, and that was allegedly the inspiration. But I don't know if that's a lie actual Sean made up or if it's just a movie fabrication to
I could
appear like
totally
he'd been
see.
pulling the strings all along.
Yeah, he like creates the problem and then manufactures the solution, which actually creates a problem. Like I love the that weird Rube Goldberg machine that like it just leads to what I mean, really kind of a tragic, unnecessary outcome for almost everybody involved.
But speaking of points of view, I would like to hear both of your kind of honest assessments of how you felt the movie balanced just kind of the lack of hard facts on these people's lives, and the lack of things being released about the incident itself, and how it kind of balanced working off of mostly just interviews with Tonya and Jeff.
Yeah, I think this is like where I struggled a little bit trying to decide if the filmmakers were making some sort of final judgment. Like it's presented very early on that like this is going to be all the different perspectives from everybody, and they're all unreliable. This person said X happened, but this person said Y happened, and who knows. The further into the movie I got, the more I felt like it did sort of treat Tanya's version as truth, which didn't bug me because I didn't like believe it, but more or less like I felt like all of a sudden the other points of view dropped off a little bit, and I don't know, maybe I'm misinterpreting it or misremembering it, but it just that's where that unevenness came in, where I'm like, so like are you taking a stance? Obviously like the film wants you to have sympathy towards her a little bit, and the situation is sort of being like the somewhat of a victim of circumstances, right, beyond her control, and then having to bear the consequences of the actions of other people. But yeah, I don't know, like I felt very conflicted about the points of views. I thought it was much more balanced in the first half of the film and made for more interesting sort of viewing than the back half, where again it really was, I think, here's why you should feel bad for Tonya Harding, and really like the result of all the shit that goes down from good intentioned Jeff trying to help her career.
Do you remember like the specific point you kind of felt that shift?
I would say probably the point in the film where they're like, oh, the incident, the thing that you came to hear
Oh,
about,
yeah.
right? Like, yes, like we continue with the Jeff interviews and things like that. There seems to be a lot less ambiguity, and maybe that's because their stories align. Again, I really tried not to look too much into the the real incident. I think now, like once we finish the podcast, I got to go down some Reddit rabbit holes, or I know there's like some books and documentaries about it. So maybe it's just that like there wasn't a lot of conflicting information, and my waffling back and forth and feeling a little uncertain is just my own manufactured
I mean, I
confusion.
think that's a valid interpretation. I didn't feel that way just because like they do make it clear Tonya knew that they were sending her death threats and like helped
Yeah,
by like, figuring out
sure.
what practice arena she had and stuff like that.
Even that she
And
kind of disputes, though. It cuts to her and she's like, oh, they found this piece of paper in my household. And like I was like, but okay, like you're showing her doing this, and maybe that's like supposed to be Jeff's point of view, and then she seems to be refuting it and
yeah,
later confesses it. So it's weird because like in the scenes where she's in the kitchen, like that's the present, right? But she's refuting that like she had, like it seems like, or almost like downplaying her involvement, but yet like she had that whole confession with like the where she sort of admits to it and like throws Jeff under the bus a little bit.
yeah. I believe that was supposed to be kind of like from Jeff's point of view. Like,
Is it
there's an earlier scene where she's firing like a shotgun at Jeff, for instance, and she's like, "Oh, well, that never happened."
no, I get that, but like, okay, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just one of those things I gotta watch again
Yeah,
and
I have seen it three
see how I feel
times,
about
so
it. I just, yeah, it was it wasn't confusing. It just sort of like it felt, I don't know. I felt like the film was a little bit more like one tracked, but I think it was also they were focusing on one very specific chain of events, and maybe that's why I felt the tonal shift a little bit too, versus sort of like a series of anecdotes that over a long span of time.
and I agree. It definitely has a Tanya bias. It is called I Tanya, not I Jeff.
Sure, yeah. I'm not even saying it's biased. I'm just saying like I couldn't figure out like what point they were necessarily trying to make, and if they were sticking to like, hey, like the truth is a little ambiguous, or like this is like the version of events that we've chosen to sort of portray as like how it went down. Whereas like the first half I very much felt like, who knows, like these are all people that are very complicated, and the truth has a way of evolving and metamorphosizing, and people will say different things to save face and whatever. But sorry to hijack that, but yeah, that's a very long-winded way of me saying like uh I think that it was just it was a little uneven for me.
Yeah, no, that's not a hijack. Thank you for explaining.
Yeah.
What do you think, Will?
I think overall I like the fact that it's sort of left that they have conflicting perspectives. That it is very much in that interview style, so that it doesn't seem like it's necessarily. I mean, you can kind of you get the feeling through it, sort of mirroring what you mentioned already, Chris, that of who it is that we're sort of rooting for, or that we are trusting the information from. And so I think that ultimately, I like that there is some ambiguity to it, that there is some disjointedness and some argument over what really happened, because it seems like that's sort of the way that it all turned out was weren't really clear. But there was, clearly there was some judgment that was passed over it. But whether or not we ever really got the full story is um, either a Google search after the podcast, or maybe is just as ambiguous as the film portrays it to be. So I think overall I like the way that it's presented. I am interested to go back though for the points that you made, just to kind of see if there's like um an aesthetic, like something either within the shot, like in the frame, that sort of denotes whose perspective, beyond when they're just talking about what's going on and you kind of get the impression based on like the narration, but also maybe if there's some other little clues um that kind of lean into whose perspective you're probably watching versus somebody else's about the events that they're uh, dealing with.
Yeah.
But no, I think overall, I don't feel like I'm as critical about it, but I also think that I like the points that were made about maybe it could use a little bit of refinement, or it's just a good excuse to go back and see maybe if there was something else that was going on. So, but overall, no, I like the format.
I like what you said about like if there are subtle clues as to kind of like what perspective any scene is from. Because the one place I did notice that is they're definitely a bit more like caricatures of themselves when the other person is clearly kind of giving a biased take. Like for instance, when there's the scene of Margot Robbie like doing the crime herself, basically. She looks very Harley Quinn in that scene,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yes. Yes.
to make it clear that that's an obvious fabrication.
Yeah, I would give anything to have a beer or two with Lavana and just let her talk. Like
Yeah, right.
if she's anything close to this like movie character, I just can't imagine. I'd be really curious to see like I don't know if that interview was recorded like just like audio, video, or transcribed to text, but again, I really tried to stay away from anything, quote unquote, from like primary sources before this, but I cannot wait to really, really like dig because it's quite fascinating. And the one thing I did read about the production of the film is it seems like the filmmakers like set out to get as much as they could like in terms of primary sources, and like they wanted to have a film that felt like it was from a lot of different perspectives and sort of built a more complete picture versus just being an autobiography, which I think is way less interesting than getting some of these like crazy characters, just given what the story entails. And
Right.
yeah.
What does the parrot have to say about
I read that poor Allison Janney was not keen on birds, and
Oh no.
like had to sort of endure, I'm sure, some of those like looks of disdain. She's like telling it to quit were probably not hard to conjure up.
Yeah, I'll be doing a lot of fact checking after this too. More than I did a little bit, but I'll be doing even more.
Yeah.
My last question before we move on to games and final thoughts is what did you think of Margot Robbie's performance? Could another actress have done it better, or did this feel like a quintessentially Margot Robbie role?
No, I can't see anybody else. And I think that Margot Robbie is one of those actors that there are certain moments where you're just watching them and they sort of just disappear into the character. And I feel like in this film, which an excellent choice for it. I don't know. I very much believe she was who I was watching, and it's kind of like watching Daniel Day-Lewis. When we were watching There Will Be Blood, where I just believe you are that character, and you look like it in the eyes. I think the scene where she is losing composure trying to put her makeup on, and then just the fake smiling and the sad eyes, and I'm like, damn, you were good. Like that is, and that I don't know, that to me just reinforced why I very much believe she is an exceptional actor, and particularly in this film that we watched, but in others as well. But yeah, so yes, I would say yes. I can't imagine anybody else playing the role, and I think she nailed it.
The makeup scene clinched it for me as well. That stood out to me every time I've watched this.
Yeah, I can't imagine anybody else playing this. I think like early in her career and still now to some extent, like Margot Robbie is unfairly categorized as like a pretty, like, like one of those actresses that's like, oh, you're in like the pretty roles and like she's pretty. But like I see a lot of just nasty comments on the internet that really don't give credit where it's due. I think she's one of the most incredible actresses working in film, and this role in particular, you look at all the iterations of Tonya that you get, and I think that was what was most impressive to me. So like the Tonya from Jeff's perspective, the young Tonya, the Tonya that's in crisis, the Tonya that's in the future, or like the present, whatever you want to call it, like sitting at the table smoking. She's so many different versions of that character that are identifiable as the same character, but at very different places in their life and under very different circumstances. And I think she just knocks it out of the fucking park, man. She's phenomenal in that role. And I can't imagine a single person doing as well as she did, for sure.
Speaking of young Tonya, shout out to McKenna Grace for that portrayal, because she's played so many famous women as like their younger selves. Just knocked it out of the park. Margot Robbie, great job. Good film. Do you guys have any other final thoughts before we move on to our little ranking game?
Just that this is one of those movies that I'll want to watch again. I think it'll be rewarding, like with like repeat viewings. Like I think there's a lot. It's a very rich film. It's well crafted, but definitely one I'm looking forward to rewatching. Anytime I'm off balance, like finishing a film, like that's a good. I feel like it's a good sign, where I'm like, I'm not sure how I felt about that. I gotta like reevaluate it. Like I think that's a sign of if nothing else, like a really interesting movie. I love that. There's a couple of films like that I've seen recently where like, man, I got to process that. But no, thanks for nominating it. I think it's quite the interesting way to tackle this. You could have done a very straightforward biopic and I'm sure it still would have been interesting, but this was way cooler. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of Vice, in that way where it was like a very interesting stylistic way to tackle something that a lot of people are familiar with, but like it made it interesting.
Well, now it is time to actually rank this role, see if it is the role of a lifetime, against for Margot Robbie's other films, which we picked before recording started. She's been in a lot of movies, but we want to pick the 5 we thought kind of showed her acting chops the best. So our unordered list, if this isn't in order, it might just be chronological order. We have Barbie, I, Tonya, Birds of Prey, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and The Wolf of Wall Street. So I don't know if you guys want to take a minute to think, or if you already know your ranking off tip of your tongue, but figure we can go in turns. Or how about this? How about we each say what our number 5 is?
Okay.
And since I've only seen one out of all of these, I'm going to throw a couple suggestions out as to number 5. I'm going to say number 5 is going to either be Birds of Prey or Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
There's no way it's Harley Quinn as number 5. I will fight you guys to the nail. I walk if it's number 5. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was going to be my pick.
Okay.
Actually,
I will say that's probably there.
Yeah, that was going to be mine as well, because I haven't seen it.
So it's making it easier.
Very scientific ranking here.
Yep. I will say why it's a good pick for number 5. It's not to the detriment of the movie necessarily, but I don't know that she has more than like a couple of lines like in the whole entire film. Almost all of the film is I should say scenes in the film with her in it, as Sharon Tate is mainly watching her sort of walk around Hollywood, drive around Hollywood. She's at parties. But there's a scene in particular that I really loved, and Tarantino kind of qualified it a little bit and said, like, listen, like, I know she doesn't have a lot of like speaking roles, but I wanted to like showcase the beauty of the human being that was like Sharon Tate. And she goes to see herself in a film, and Sharon Tate is just like sitting in the audience, glowing, like with people like laughing because it's a comedic role, and just like soaking it in. And it's just such a beautiful like facial performance that kind of highlights like the tragedy of it. But she doesn't get a lot to do, and that's okay. He didn't want it to just be about the tragedy of Sharon Tate. I highly recommend you watch that movie. It's one of Tarantino's best. Should watch it. But I think 5 is a good choice for that reason. Like, she's not front and center, doesn't have a lot to do. She makes an impact, and it is really, really stunning performance for what time she has, but it's not the best by far.
Okay. Number 5 it is. Number 4.
Well, like based on what I'm assuming you guys are going to say for Birds of Prey, Barbie, and I, Tonya, I think Wolf of Wall Street is going to have to be number 4 then, right?
Concur.
Yeah. We're all in agreement.
Yeah.
I'm just using logic here. It's just purely logic at this point.
Chris, do you want to articulate a more fleshed out reason?
I'm famously kind of sour on that movie. I thought it was an hour over long. I didn't particularly like the subject matter. Probably another one I should give a second shot, but I was uncharacteristically cold for a Scorsese movie on that. Wasn't my favorite of his. But she's memorable. I mean, the famous, like, sort of the scene, where she's tantalizing DiCaprio to stick out, and she's great, and a lot of like the kind of everything's falling apart scenes and things like that. But yeah.
Okay. So far we have number 5, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Number 4, The Wolf of Wall Street. Number 3, Will, do you want to go first?
My logic dictates. Truthfully, I think I, Tonya, and Barbie are going to clinch it in first and second place, respectively. But I could be surprised by this. I'm still going to say Birds of Prey is going to be number 3 for you guys.
Okay, Chris.
No, disagree.
Hey, all right. So then I'm going to say I, Tonya is probably going to get knocked into the third place.
What's your third place pick, Chris?
I feel like then
I have a hard time.
Barbie's going to be at the top.
I feel like as much as I love Barbie and the message behind it, and Margot Robbie's great, I do feel like I'm putting it here third because I think the iconicness of the character. Oh, it's so tough, man. These top three are going to be hard.
Be careful.
I haven't seen Birds of Prey, but I have seen Barbie, so I have the opposite inclination.
Is when you think Margot Robbie, you think like Harley Quinn for me, for my money. Like I think like she's closely tied to that, but I'm okay with compromising. We can find out the top 2 and putting I, Tonya there.
Oh, you want to put I, Tonya for third?
I'm not putting Harley Quinn below the top 2. I can tell you right now. Like when you think of like Harley Quinn, you think Margot Robbie, or the opposite, I guess. Margot Robbie, you think Harley Quinn for sure.
Okay. Well, I'm okay putting Barbie in third then. How do you feel, Will?
That's okay by me. I haven't seen it. I need to. It's all
we can chalk it up to recency bias. I might be wrong in a year. Like when Barbie's had some time to marinate, I might go, what was I thinking? Like, of course, but
all right. I feel like I know what your number 2 pick is going to be, Chris. But Will, what's your number 2 pick?
All right. So we locked in Barbie for 3. Is that what just happened?
Mm-hmm.
Then I guess I, Tonya is going to be number 2 because if Harley Quinn and Margot Robbie are inseparable, then that's who's going to be number 1.
I disagree, but I feel like I'm going to be outnumbered here.
I could be convinced. Like I'm on the fence, so like, sell me on I, Tonya over Harley Quinn. And what I should say, like, how do you like? Is it just in terms of like her being inseparable from the role? Like, are there like? Go ahead, sell me. I'm open to it.
Well, first of all, yes, she is inseparable from the role, but I also think she does a really good job portraying different ages. For instance, like, my God, that flirting scene between her and Jeff before their first kiss, I could feel the teenage awkwardness and angst, and that was very well acted. And she's clearly very different as she ages, in her dynamic with her mom and her dynamic with Jeff. And I think she does a good job in just like her basic body language with that. But there's also just kind of like you get to see different sides of Tonya's personality. You get to see her in joy and panic. You get to see her when she's being kind of playful and when she's even like kind of trying to prod at her mom a bit and like finally, be a bit playful with her and how that backfires. I feel like it's a very it feels like a very true, authentic person, even though it's kind of a ridiculous person. And I feel like that says a lot about Margot Robbie's acting.
Sold.
Yay!
I'm going to put Harley Quinn at 2, as much as like it is inseparable from her and vice versa. I think you make a good point. Like Harley Quinn is very much like a identifiable character with identifiable traits. And there's some complex stuff for sure. I think like if you've never, I know it's a lot to ask because most of those movies are garbage, but the Suicide Squad and Birds of Prey in particular are fabulous and have a lot more complexity than Suicide Squad, which is like the first thing she was in. They tried, but oddly like enough, there's a lot of parallels. So it started the trend in like the films, at least, of portraying Harley Quinn as a victim of like abuse, trying to leave the relationship. Like she's always been that, like with the relationship with the Joker, but I think really making her a feminist icon in terms of like the fallout and like what she does after, like that became just how the character was done. Like, but I, Tonya, would agree with you. She does a lot of really good work from a lot of different perspectives, like even portraying those like those unreliable narrator scenes, like where you said like, oh, she's got to play this from somebody else's perspective, right? Like not necessarily the true Tonya or like the Tonya from how she would view herself, but how would she be viewed by somebody else. So sold.
Yay. I was going to just keep talking until I saw you nod, but
I'm comfortable
filibuster
with
this
it.
podcast.
Hey, listen, I wasn't accepting anything below number 2 just because, despite being in some dog shit movies, like that specific iteration is like iconic now. But now you sold me. I think. I mean, listen, like that's what the whole podcast has been about. I think we all kind of agreed it was a powerhouse performance, and I'm just glad to see her continue to like get good shit, like good roles. Like she doesn't pick a lot of things that are uninteresting. Like even the little cameo we talked about in Asteroid City, it has impact. It's just 2 minutes, but it has impact. You're like, oh my god, like you know her immediately, right? And it's a really great important scene to the film that I won't spoil. But
good to know.
Yeah.
All right, so we have our final ranking. Number 1, I, Tonya. Number 2, Birds of Prey. Number 3, Barbie. Number 4, The Wolf of Wall Street. And number 5, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Sweet.
Margot Robbie, let me know if you agree.
Tag her.
That's
And
right.
all of you guys should, by all you guys, I mean you two should definitely watch any of those that you haven't seen.
Yeah.
With that, let's see what we're watching next. Anybody have like a prediction on like a category? Like want to look into your crystal ball? No one's feeling it, huh?
I'm pulling it up right now.
I think we're going to
The
get
categories?
a versus mode.
Book.
I'm still shuffling. I'm gonna say that we get
Amber
a milk or wine. I don't know why. All right, drawing. Oh, Will manifested. Was the book better?
Oh shit.
Is it Dune?
So while I'm looking up the book, a reminder that we will be giving a full month before we record this one. So this will be put to the side. And the book / film that we are going to be watching is The Shining.
Ooh.
So almost perfect
Nice.
because it'll be like inching into Halloween. So we'll announce the final dates for that. So we'll be watching / reading The Shining. Which means we have to draw a second card in the meantime. I'm gonna veto myself if it's one of my picks, just because that is one of my nominations for The Shining. So hold up while I pick up the singular card. Hopefully, it's not always easy to do this in Tabletop Simulator. That's my one like gripe with this program. All right, put that to the side. Let's see what we're getting for the next category.
Yeah, we know it's going to be rigged if you get another book.
It is Ensemble Energy, and I do believe this is a Will pick. So Ensemble Energy, to remind our audiences, is a film that has an ensemble cast, and we're going to talk about why they did a great job developing unique characters and plot lines. Oh, Will, fuck yeah, man. Thanks for giving me an excuse to watch Heat. So Heat is the film.
Oh, man.
Michael Mann film starring Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Val Kilmer, Tom Sizemore. Who else am I missing in there?
Ashley
There's
Judd, I think's in there too.
Ashley Judd, yeah.
Yeah.
Danny Trejo. There's like everybody in this, but most famously, like when they were doing the marketing, this is the first time that Robert De Niro and Al Pacino act in the same scene together. Because, like, believe it or not, up until that time, even though they were in Godfather Part 2, they never actually shared an on-screen scene. And boy, do they have one of the all-time greats in this movie. So, Will, talk us through why you nominated Heat. Like, what is there anything particular like you love about this type of ensemble? Obviously, it's like a crime thriller heist film, but
there's definitely the crime aspect of it. The heist, well, the crime heist And also the fact that, well, two scenes in particular. There's a big shootout scene, without spoiling anything to go into too much detail, that I just thought was very well executed and is like kind of in the same vein as like people that like John Wick for how realistic the gunplay is. I think was also mentioned to be like very realistic depiction of how people would have reacted in this kind of shootout. Which don't, I think it's usually Val Kilmer and his portrayal of it, but there's that. It's mostly just for Pacino and De Niro, man. I mean, just I don't know. It's the way that they both portray their characters, how different they are, and these two forces coming together that you're just like, how is this going to turn out? It's dark, it's gritty, it's got some. I mean, Pacino is like ridiculous, but also awesome. And besides like the fact that their dialogue together in one scene is so quotable, like the whole exchange. I think ultimately I just like the fact that Michael Mann in some of his films, like when you hear guns go off, you feel like you are in a firefight. Like it doesn't feel like they have tamped down the noise. Like if a gun goes off and it's like you feel that jolt in your body that stuff
No
is
one's
happening
talking over
around
the
you.
gunshots.
No,
You know what I mean? Like,
no, like
yeah.
it's like proper sound. I don't know the way it's done. I mean, it's not so loud. It's like a Nolan film where you can't hear people talking over all the noise, but it's like you feel like you're in the action. And so I think that was very powerful. It's not something that I see a lot of people do. It's always like the Hollywood version of what gunfire sounds like most of the time. So
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll
Well,
be my first time watching this, so I'm excited.
It's an annual watch for me, so thanks for giving me an excuse
Nice.
to pull it out of the digital pile. There is a great like director's cut like that just came out in 4K. We can talk off mic, but it is worth it's worth like no added scenes. I think it's just like it's cleaned up a little bit. And excitingly, there's a novel called Heat 2 that is now being developed into a screenplay that I won't talk about because it would spoil some significant plot developments in Heat. But yeah, Michael Mann's one of those guys that like has come to prominence like more and more like over the like last decade or so. I always loved Collateral, and I'm glad to see that movie kind of starting to get its due.
Yes.
But Heat in particular, I always had like a very, very like big soft spot for as both an action and crime movie, but also like it's a great study in like how to shoot stuff and that cafe scene in particular. So when you get to it, May, De Niro and Pacino in the cafe. Oh, there's a young Natalie Portman. She's part of the ensemble too. Very young. Yep.
Nice.
So very excited. All right.
Yeah.
And that about wraps her up. All does her. To quote the Big Lebowski one more time before the podcast is over. You can find us on, you know what? I'm going to call it Twitter. You can find us on Twitter, you know what I mean, at ScreenQuest Pod, where the coward Elon Musk will not get into a cage with the other social media guy. And we do love and appreciate all of the support. You can continue to submit your nominations. I will include that in the episode description. I think I forgot to do it last week. That's all right. You can find it in most episodes of the last couple of months. We will be bringing back Scream Quest for the month of October. More to come on that a little later. And until next week, we love you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.